name is Athena and today I'm bringing you my wrap up for the reading rush. The reading rush was previously called the Booktubathon, and it was a readathon that took place from the 22nd to the 28th of July. It is currently Sunday the 28th of July and it is getting closer to the end of the day, so I thought I would film my wrap up. I read quite a lot. I'm not planning to read much more tonight, so the first two books that I read for the reading rush were A Silent Voice Volume 6 and A Silent Voice Volume 7, and this was for the challenge of reading a book and watch its adaptation, because after reading these two books, well, I watched the movie of A Silent Voice. I completely forgot to mention, but I used A Silent Voice Volume 6 for my book with purple on the cover. Now, I read most of this series, the first 5 volumes. I read those earlier in the year. We will quickly pause this recording because my dog feels it is time for her dinner. It was indeed time to feed my dog, by the way. This is written by Yoshitoki Oima. This is about a boy and a girl. The girl is deaf. When they were younger, he bullied her, and then they meet again in high school, and he wants to sort of make up for it and be friends now. If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll have seen me do quick reviews of the earlier books of the series. Anyway, so now I read Volume 6 and Volume 7. I enjoyed reading these volumes. Volume 5 ended on quite the cliffhanger, so it was nice to read Volume 6, and then of course it was quite nice to then read Volume 7 straight after, rather than having to wait a month, which is what I usually do. At least that's how I read the rest of the series. And after finishing off the series, then a little while later, I watched the Silent Voice movie. I enjoyed this movie. 2 elements of the manga series were left out in the movie, and like, I get that, but also having read the manga series, I did miss them. But obviously, spoilers, so I'm not gonna talk about it exactly. But yeah, it was enjoyable to see the movie and see the characters, you know, talking, all that. So everything come to life. And now I am not a deaf person, so I can't really speak to the representation in this series. There is a sign language in this series. I presume it's Japanese sign language. And there is a theme of bullying in this series. And I found in the movie some scenes were a bit hard to watch because of the bullying that was there. And like, I found that kind of thing harder to watch than to read about, if that makes sense. I was bullied when I was in like primary school and high school, so I found that just emotionally hard to watch. I guess a trigger warning for that if you're thinking of watching this movie or reading this series. And like I said, I can't speak to how well the difference of representation was done. I enjoyed reading it. I wish we would have seen a bit more from the girl's perspective. Her name is Shoko, and the boy's perspective name isn't Shoya, and you kind of really see it from his perspective the whole series. I would have liked to see her perspective as well. But overall, I did enjoy finishing off the series and watching the movie. Now, for my book meant to read in 2018, I picked Sofie and the Pinguïns by Edward van de Vendel, with illustrations by Goede and photo comics by Yvonne plus Willem. Now, I don't really make TBRs, so I struggled a little bit with this challenge. So what I did instead was, because I couldn't really remember which books I had meant to read last year, I looked at the books I bought in 2018. Now, when I buy a book, I don't always intend to read it very quickly or anything. For example, for some like books and series, I am slowly collecting them when I find them for cheap, if that makes sense. And then like I'll read it when I have the whole series, yeah. So, but that was the best I could do. I bought this book in 2018, so I picked this as my read that I wanted to read last year. because obviously I bought it from a library sale because I wanted to read it. This is a nice story about a girl named Sofie, and she really likes penguins, and one day she falls down the stairs and breaks her arm. And the book is filled with not only facts about penguins, but also just a nice story. Oh, the lighting in here is... Can you even see that? Yeah. Oh, there we go. It's a nice story. It has lots of nice illustrations. It has information in it about penguins. Sofie is really passionate about penguins. And there are also those photo comics that I mentioned. Also, every now and then there's like a sort of, yeah, I guess comic illustrations. Oh, here is a photo comic. So I found this mostly to be an enjoyable book. I quite enjoyed reading it and following the story. There was one use of a specific word, a Dutch word. This book was published in 2010. Now, I don't know for sure, but this word is a bit similar to, let's say, the R word in English, and so I felt that the way it was used in this book did not sit right with me. It was not used for a person, but as an, is that an adjective? Sofie was describing her dream. She had a dream during the night, and she was describing it, and what she meant to say was like, this was a bit of a silly dream or weird dream, something like that is what I presume based on what the dream was. And so I don't exactly know which English word you can compare this word with, but it just didn't sit right with me. So there was that. I don't know how things were in 2010. But other than that, I thought the illustrations were nice, the story was nice, it was nice to learn about penguins. I liked how passionate Sofie was about the penguins, and it was a nice children's book. Then I read the little book of shocking food facts by Craig, Holden, Feinberg and Dale Petersen. Now this was my other pick for a book that I meant to read last year in 2018. But since I picked both and I thought I would just see what I felt in the mood for, once I finished this, I kind of felt like reading this as well. So then I changed this book to be the book with 5 or more words in the title, because it has 7 words in the title. And the book had originally planned for that, got changed, but it doesn't matter. This book basically is about some food facts, about health and nutrition and the environment, and it is accompanied by pictures. So I'm gonna try to show you an example. Well, let's say here's an example. Sometimes the text is like with the picture. I'll just quickly flick through it. Oh, that was kind of maybe a not suitable, but I'll quickly flick through it. So you can read it relatively quickly in that sense, but it does contain some shocking facts. This book was published in 2010, but a lot of the facts were a bit older than that, more in like the 2000s. But there were also some facts that were from the 1990s. And so, because this book is 9 years old at this point, it's 2019 now, I don't know how some of these facts have progressed, in the sense that like some of these facts are just about like what's in specific foods or how specific food is made, and other facts are like in this year this, if that makes sense. So I don't know like how the trends are now. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this correctly, but I will say I found the book a little bit triggering, in the sense that I sometimes find it difficult to read about food and what some people say was good and what isn't, if that makes sense. So that's more me than it has to do with the book, but I just wanted to point that out because it's part of my reading experience. I liked that the units used in this book were both in imperial and metric system. So for example here, it's in kilogram and LBS, is that pounds? I'm not really sure, but either way. The money is in dollars. I presume that's American dollars. I do feel they focus more on some countries than others, if that makes sense. I don't know what country the authors are originally from. Countries mentioned are the United States. That one is most commonly mentioned. Like that one I showed you just now is about China. The UK is mentioned. A couple of other countries are mentioned. The world is mentioned as a whole. I think Japan may be mentioned, but I'm not sure. At the back of it, there is a few pages of where for each fact, and the facts are mostly on like a double spread of pages. And for each fact, the authors go into a little bit more like detail, as well as providing you the link where, or the paper, or wherever they got the fact from. I think they're all books and papers actually, but there are online links where you can go read anyway. And it was nice that they provided a bit of extra information. But yeah, it can be a bit triggering for me, a book like this. But in short, it was an interesting book. I like the pictures. Now we get to the library loans portion of my reading. And so I wanted to get my own books out of the way first. Those challenges were not ones that I could do with my library loans. So that's why I read those 4 books, these 4 books, as well, and the film, as my own books. Now we get to my library loans. I'm just going to continue to read the rest of my library loans for the next few weeks. So the next book I read was Een Fee uit Duizenden. This is Milla and Sugar book 2. And the original title of this is Una Fata su un Millione. I read this book for the challenge of reading a book with a non-human main character. I had actually picked another book for this challenge, as well as this one. But I decided to read this one. The other one was quite long, so I will be reading that, but not during the reading rush. Anyway, so Milla and Sugar is a series, and it's about Milla, who's a witch, and Sugar, who's a fairy, and they can do magic. There's a talking hamster and a talking cat. This is book 2, and I have read books 1 through 9 from the library, other than book 2, because book 2, for the longest time, I could not find for several years. Well, I found the other ones and read them. So I was really surprised when I was at the library last time that I found this, because I honestly thought, even in the library wishlist, it just was like not there. So anyway, it turns out online there's actually been more published, but maybe they haven't translated anymore. I don't know. These books are written by Prunella. I don't know if that's the author's actual name, but that's what the library says. And the books have some nice illustrations in them. In this particular story, in this world, I should say that first. So Milla and Sugar can do magic, they're magical, but they are not allowed to let the, let's say, humans know that magical beings exist. So they go to a school for like human children, but they can't let on that they can do magic. Anyway, so when they go to school in this book, they see or sense that somebody's been doing magic in the classroom, and yeah. I enjoyed this book, but not as much as some of the other books in this series, as far as I remember, because it's been a while since I've read all the other ones. There's also a villain in this series, and like the villain is banished to live underground. He has a helper. The helper is more dangerous because he's trying to get the villain unbanished. Anyway, so this was enjoyable, but not as much as some of the other ones in the series.
Hello YouTube.
For an author's debut book, I read Tracy Lacy is Compleet Kierewiet, or in English, Tracy Lacy is Coo-Coo Bananas by Tania Lacy and Danielle McDonald. Was it Tania Lacy? Anyway, this is book 1 in the Tracy Lacy series. Tania Lacy is, I think, the author, and Danielle McDonald does the illustrations. Yeah, that's what my library says anyway. But it's about a girl who is gonna go to, what it says here, high school, secondary school, but since this is translated from English, I'm not entirely sure if that would be then primary school to secondary school or what exactly. By the way, she's going to a new school because she's graduating the previous school, and she has a plan to be like a normal person. Yeah, I'm not explaining this very well, but it has lots of cute illustrations. Basically at school, that they see her as a bit weird, if that makes sense. And so she wants to try and appear not weird. Let me put it that way. I really liked all all the illustrations. And this was a fun read. I enjoyed this a lot. I will say towards the end, I was also looking forward to it being finished. I think because I was reading all this on the same day and I was getting tired of reading. I wanted to finish my book before the end of the day, something like that. But it was funny. A few times it was quite funny. I liked that. I enjoyed this read. Oh yeah, and the ending confused me a bit. I felt like it ended very abruptly. I'm sure I missed something there. I'm sure it makes sense to other people. But yeah, it confused me. Now there are more books in the series according to Goodreads. I don't know if they've been translated into Dutch. If my library does get them, I would like to read them. So the ending confused me, but I liked most of the book a lot. Then I read Goth Girl and the Sinister Symphony by Riddell. This is book 4, I think, in the Goth Girl series. This was originally my book for 5 or more words in the title, but I decided to use this book for that instead. But this was my library loan and I still wanted to read it, so I read it. This was actually also the book that I used to read in the same spot the whole time. So even though I had planned something else for that, yeah. So this didn't specifically fulfill any challenges, but I wanted to read it anyway. Other than that, it will count towards my book total. So in this particular book, Lord Goth, who is Ada's father, he throws a music festival party at the manor that they live in. Is that the right word? Well, here's the synopsis on the back if you want to see it. Ada's grandmother is trying to find Ada's father a new wife because Ada's mother died a long time ago. I really liked the illustrations. Here's Ada, but here are some illustrations. Riddell has a very specific style of illustrating and I quite like it. Now, I really liked the first book in this series. I liked the second and third book a bit less. This was an enjoyable read. Like, not my favorite, but I didn't think it was going to be, based on what I thought of the previous, like, book 2 and 3. I do like about this series is that a lot of the characters, like for example on this music festival there are guests, their names are kind of a spin on like real life or fictional figures, real life figures or fictional figures, if that makes sense. So that's quite funny. So despite the fact that this is classed as a children's book, I think also adults will get something out of it maybe. So yeah, this was a nice read. By this point I hadn't gotten a 5-star read yet, because that was one of the badges on the website that you could get. So then I read ADD, Verdwalen, hoofd, prikkels by Ans Ettma-Essler. And this also didn't fulfill a specific challenge other than counting towards my book total. But I loaned this from the library when I saw it was available because I really wanted to read this. It talks about the difference between ADD and ADHD. So ADD is attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity, which is what I have. I'm not hyperactive. And in the Netherlands, most of the books are about ADHD. But unfortunately, I was a bit disappointed with this. First of all, it is only very small. It is less than 100 pages. It wasn't as useful as I was hoping it would be. It didn't teach me a whole lot of new stuff. I did like some parts. I related to some things, not to others. Aside from my ADD, I also have autism, so there is that. I found it a shame that in the section of like other diagnoses that can happen at the same time that a person can have aside from ADD that often happen. In Dutch they call it comorbiditeit, but I'm not sure what the English but for that is, but it's like people with ADD sometimes also have these other things, if that makes sense. Like they happen together more often. Yeah, so what they mention here is anxiety disorder, OCD, depression, and bipolar. Anyway, I found it a shame that autism wasn't among this, because according to my old psychiatrist, they do happen together quite often. Whereas there was one point, the only point in the book where autism is mentioned is in a different part of the text, different chapter. But there it is mentioned as kind of a joke. They're describing this person who goes to work and they're a bit awkward and unorganized. I can't remember the exact specifics. And then with quotation marks, they are mentioned as the autist of the party or of the work team. And that just rubbed me the wrong way. It's not something to joke about or use as an, like, a person either has autism or they don't. They're either autistic or they're not, but obviously this person is not autistic because this is about ADD and nowhere else is mentioned, and it was kind of used as a joke, and that didn't sit right with me. So yeah, this was a bit of a disappointment. It was still nice to read. I don't regret reading it or anything, but I was expecting to get a bit more out of it, I guess. So maybe I had too high expectations. A couple of things in this may also be outdated because this was published in 2009 and there was some more like government rules towards certain things that I'm not sure if still the case now. That's not the fault of the author, obviously things can change. And yeah, so not everything applied to me because I also have autism, which obviously this is written for people with ADD who do not have autism. There isn't one book out there that is written for people with both ADD and autism in terms of information books. There's a handful of memoirs. And then another thing I wanted to say about this book is that a few times it was a bit gender specific and heterosexual, if that makes sense, by assuming that the person with ADD was a man and he would have a wife. So now I get that we can't be writing he/she, or even, see, in English we have the word they, but in Dutch that's not as much of a thing. Now I have heard from a non-binary person that there are some Dutch words that can be used, but they're certainly not as much in the language as the English they has been for centuries apparently. Whereas the Dutch word is not in that meaning, at least. So I get that, but I was not okay with the way this book assumed those things, if that makes sense. Like, it could have easily said their partner instead of wife, and yeah, and then you could have, yeah. It sounds like I didn't really like this book at all, which is not true. My next read was De Fantastische Max van Mars by Yvonne Berg. And this was my read. Well, I read this book in the same spot the whole time, so it could count for that. By this point, I had also read 7 books. If you've been keeping count, this was my 9th book. Anyway, this is the book I was reading during the read-in that was hosted on Instagram. Anyway, this was my 5-star read, and I was very glad because I didn't think we were going to get there, because a couple of my reads were a little bit disappointing, and so there were some 9 out of 10s, because that's a system I would prefer to use, but no 10 out of 10s. And I feel if it has to be a 5-star read, then it has to be 10 out of 10. Anyway, so I really like this book. This book is about a boy named Max. He says he's from Mars. He is kind of bored at school, so he says he's from Mars and is trying to make things more fun in life. This book also has some nice illustrations in it. Oh, you can't really see, but there's an illustration now and then. And I really enjoyed this book. It was quite funny. I laughed a few times. Just Max, because that's how you would pronounce it in Dutch. Max was quite funny. The things he said, like how he talked to his teacher, and yeah, it was just very funny. And yeah, so that was a surprise for me. I didn't know it was going to be that funny and that good, and it was really good. And so I was very happy to get my 5-star read. So the only minor point that I didn't like about this book was that at one point it used a specific expression in Dutch that I feel is outdated and possibly racist. I don't know if it is or not. I haven't asked anybody, but that's just what I think, and I think we should not be using that expression. So I don't know if this term, because I've never heard anybody say anything about that, but it just didn't sit quite right with me. Perhaps I am wrong. I don't know. And then lastly, earlier today, I read book 4 in the Keukenprins van Meccano series, De Grote Ontsnapping by Mathilda Masters and Georgine Overwater. Book 4. I've read the first 3 books in this series from the library in, I don't know, earlier times. This series is about Max, another character named Max, coincidentally, but his full name of this character is Maximilian, and he is a prince. His parents are not there, so he lives with his aunt. There she is. And she is called Cookie, and she is the chef in the prison. And so Max lives at the prison with Cookie. Oh, here's a picture of the prison. So his aunt, Cookie, is the prison chef. In this specific book, in the beginning of the book, Cookie, his aunt, breaks her leg and has to go to the hospital for a while. So then they get a new prison chef, this guy, who is called Chef Bambino, and he doesn't like children, so Max ends up having to go to what they call Het Instituut, which is an orphanage basically, and he is stuck there, and it's a very, very strict, terrible place. And so yeah, that's what this book is about. The book has lots of nice illustrations. I really like that about this series. There are some like whimsical elements to it. Yeah, I just like the first 3 books in the series. I really enjoyed this one. Not like 10 out of 10, but like 9 out of 10. Yeah, I really liked it. My total page count was 1949 pages and 10 books finished. And I did all the challenges of books to read. All the reading challenges. So, that was great. I do feel quite tired. Aside from reading, I have also been trying to catch up to YouTube and keep up to date with all the videos people are posting. I follow quite a few people, and some of those people have been posting reading rush content, like reading vlogs or doing the video challenges. So I'm quite tired now from all of that. As you can see in the graph, I didn't read anything on Monday. On Monday, I was very tired from the previous weekend, and I was also busy cataloging some books I bought. So I didn't actually read anything on Monday, but that was fine with me because I wanted to do those things. To be honest, I was extremely exhausted on Monday. I could not do much other than the things I did do. I didn't watch any YouTube. I was too tired. And so on day 2, I read a bit, but not that much. Then on day 3, I read quite a lot. Day 4, I read a bit less again. And then day 5, 6, and 7. Yeah. So that was my reading rush. I had lots of fun. I do find it difficult to make a TBR and stick to it. However, I do have the library loans, so I do have to read those books in the next few weeks. Otherwise, I have to return them without reading them. So, but there were a couple of challenges that I couldn't use my library loans for, so I used these books. Anyway, this was quite a long wrap up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!